Michael Reinoehl, suspect in fatal shooting of Patriot prayer backer in Oregon, killed by federal task force. Lacey, Washington. A man suspected of fatally shooting a supporter of a right-wing group in Portland, Oregon, last week after a caravan of Donald Trump backers rode through downtown was killed Thursday as investigators moved in to arrest him, a senior Justice Department official told the Associated Press. The man, Michael Reinoehl, 48, was killed as a federal task force attempted to apprehend him in Lacey, Washington, the official said. Reinoehl was the prime suspect in the killing of 39-year-old Aaron J. Danielson, a Patriot prayer backer who was shot in the chest Saturday night, the official said. Federal agents from the FBI and the U.S. Marshals Service had located Reinoehl on Thursday after a warrant was issued for his arrest. During the encounter, Reinoehl was shot by a law enforcement officer who was working on the federal task force, the official said. Fighting corruption. Big government what is the right-wing group Patriot Prayer linked to Portland confrontations and who is Joey Gibson? The official said Reinoehl had pulled a gun during the encounter and was shot by law enforcement. The official could not discuss the matter publicly and spoke to the AP on condition of anonymity. The New York Times, citing 3 law enforcement officials familiar with the investigation, was first to report the fatal shooting of Reinoehl on Thursday night. The Washington Post, citing a Justice Department source, confirmed Reinoehl's death. The U.S. Marshals Service fugitive task forces, comprised of deputy marshals, other federal agents and local law enforcement officers from a variety of agencies, are responsible for apprehending violent felons and other wanted suspects. The shooting of Reinoehl came around the same time President Donald Trump lashed out on Twitter, calling for Portland police to arrest the cold-blooded killer of Aaron J. Danielson. Do your job, and do it fast. Everybody knows who this thug is, Trump tweeted. No wonder Portland is going to hell. Reinoehl had described himself in a social media post as 100% Antifa, suggested the tactics of counter-protesters amounted to warfare, and had been shot at one protest and cited for having a gun at another. He had been a regular presence at anti-racism demonstrations in Portland. Police on July 5 cited Reinoehl on allegations of possessing a loaded gun in a public place, resisting arrest and interfering with police. On July 26, Reinoehl was shot near his elbow after he got involved in a scuffle between an armed white man and a group of young people of color. The man who was carrying the gun, Aaron Scott Collins, told the Oregonian, Oregon Live that he and a friend had just left a bar when they saw the group harassing an older black man. His friend began filming them with a phone, and the group confronted them, calling them Nazis, he said. A very dark history Oregon's racist past fuels protests against injustice in Portland. Reinoehl later that day spoke to an AP videographer. His arm was wrapped in a bloody bandage. He said he was on his way to meet protest medics so they could change it. He said he didn't know what had started the altercation between Collins and the group, but that several people had decided to intervene when they saw Collins fighting with minors. As soon as the adults jumped in, he pulled out a gun, Reinoehl said. I jumped in there and pulled the gun away from people's heads, avoided being shot in the stomach and I got shot in the arm. Reinoehl also was wanted on a warrant out of Baker County in eastern Oregon, where court records show he skipped a hearing related to a June case in which he has been charged with driving under the influence of controlled substances, reckless driving, reckless endangerment and unlawful possession of a firearm. Police said he drove on an interstate at up to 111 miles per hour, with his daughter in the car, while racing his 17-year-old son, who was in a different vehicle. Protests have erupted daily in the Pacific Northwest city since the killing of George Floyd. With unruly demonstrations in Portland nearing the 100-day mark, Oregon Governor Kate Brown and other Democratic leaders on Thursday called for an end to violence even as federal agents were continuing to arrest protesters who allegedly assaulted law enforcement officers. The violence must stop, Brown wrote. There is no place for white supremacy or vigilantism in Oregon. All who perpetrate violent crimes must be held equally accountable. Portland Police Chief Chuck Lovell has denounced protesters who broke windows and set a fire this week to a business in the upscale apartment building where Mayor Ted Wheeler lives. Protesters are angry that Wheeler has not stopped officers from using batons and tear gas against Black Lives Matter protesters. Wheeler now reportedly plans to move out of the building. As of a week ago, 74 people were facing federal charges for crimes allegedly committed during demonstrations in Portland since at least May 29, U.S. Attorney Billy Williams said. Contributing, Steve Kiggins, USA Today, Associated Press writers Gene Johnson in Seattle, Jillian Flackus in Portland, Oregon, and Andrew Silsky in Salem, Oregon. South Dakota dismisses elite class of so-called experts, carries on with state fair after Sturgis rally fueled COVID-19 surge. South Dakota is one of the nation's hotspots for COVID-19 infections. That didn't stop another large-scale event from kicking off Thursday. The rural South Dakota State Fair, which reported an attendance of 205,000 people last year, is set to run through Labor Day with more hand-washing stations, social distancing reminders and an encouragement, but not a requirement, for attendees to wear masks. It comes on the heels of the state's two largest events, the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally and the Sioux Empire Fair. In the weeks following those events, South Dakota has emerged as a virus hotbed, according to data analysis. State and national health experts say the rise in cases is likely fueled by a combination of factors, including school reopenings, small gatherings and major events. It became known about the refusal of the European Union to impose sanctions against Lukashenko. President of Belarus Alexander Lukashenko will not be included in the EU sanctions list due to the refusal of Germany, France and Italy to support this proposal. This became known to Die Welt. It is noted that Berlin, Paris and Rome believe that it is necessary to keep the channels of communication with Lukashenko open. In their opinion, falling under the sanctions would mean a complete cessation of the dialogue with Belarus. It is noted that the Baltic countries and Poland were in favor of imposing sanctions against Lukashenko. On August 31, the Baltic states announced sanctions against Lukashenko. They will include a ban on entry. This means the cancellation of official visits of the head of state. EU sources have previously reported on plans to impose sanctions against top officials in Belarus. The upcoming restrictive measures may affect up to 20 people. Representatives of the alliance refused to recognize the election results and Lukashenko's legitimacy. After the presidential election in Belarus, in which, according to the SEC, Lukashenko won 80% of the vote, mass protests began there. Demonstrators are demanding the resignation of the country's president and fair elections. There were clashes with security forces, during which dozens of people were injured. Portland suspect shot dead by police during arrest. Police in the U.S. have shot dead a man suspected of fatally shooting a right-wing activist during protests in Portland, Oregon, officials say. Michael Reinoehl, 48, was being investigated for the killing of a supporter of President Trump during last weekend's tension. Reinoehl earlier said he acted in self-defense when he shot Aaron Danielson, a member of the Patriot Prayer Group. Police said he was armed and was shot during a confrontation with officers. Last Saturday, Trump supporters held a large rally and fought with anti-racism protesters in violent exchanges. Black Lives Matter protests have been taking place nightly in Portland since the killing of black man George Floyd in May. Reinoehl, who regularly attended the protests, had told Vice News that he had thought he and a friend were going to be stabbed by Danielson. "I had no choice. I had a choice. I could have sat there and watched them kill a friend of mine of color. But I wasn't going to do that," he said. On Thursday, President Trump had highlighted the killing of Danielson, tweeting, "Why aren't the Portland police arresting the cold-blooded killer of Aaron J. Danielson? Do your job, and do it fast." What do we know about the arrest? A warrant for Reinoehl's arrest was issued and he was located by agents on Thursday in Lacey, Washington, about 120 miles, 193 kilometers, north of Portland. Thurston County Sheriff's Lieutenant Ray Brady said it was not clear why the suspect was in Lacey and he did not believe the suspect lived at the address. Lieutenant Brady said the police were conducting surveillance when the suspect left the apartment and got into a vehicle in the road. There was a confrontation between the officers that were on scene and the subject, he said. The information we have at this time is that the subject was armed. There were shots that were fired into the vehicle and the subject fled from the vehicle, at which time there was additional shots that were fired. He said 4 officers fired their weapons. Why have there been clashes in Portland? Reinoehl was suspected of shooting Danielson during clashes on Saturday night when a large procession of supporters of President Trump clashed with Black Lives Matter protesters. The shooting came